So, if you just look down at your wrist right now, like if you are wearing a smartwatch, it's probably telling you that you've taken, I don't know, maybe 4,000 steps today.
Right, yeah. Or tracking your heart rate, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Or, maybe you're actually driving right now. You're watching the odometer tick up, and you're measuring the exact physical distance you are putting between your origin and your destination.
Oh, absolutely. We organize basically our entire lives around the absolute certainty of those measurements.
We really do.
Yeah.
But, and this is where it gets crazy, what if an ancient philosopher could use, like, relentless, unbreakable logic to prove to you that not a single one of those steps actually occurred?
Yeah, not in the way you think they did anyway.
Right. Like, what if the very act of walking across your living room or driving down the highway is fundamentally a structural illusion?
It's a huge claim.
It is. So welcome to the deep dive. To you, our inherently curious listener, we have a really profound mission today. We are going to fundamentally break down something you do every single second without, a fraction of a thought.
Without even noticing it.
Exactly. We're going to deconstruct the very nature of moving.
And what's so fascinating here is just the sheer audacity of the claim we are exploring today.
Yeah, tell us about the source text.
Right, so we're looking at this deeply foundational Buddhist text. It's called the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā.
Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. Did I get that?
You got it, yeah. It was written by the philosopher Nāgārjuna somewhere around the 2nd century CE.
Okay, so incredibly old.
Very old. The title translates to the root verses on the middle way. And, I mean, it is just a legendary, towering achievement of human thought.
But we aren't, covering the whole book today, right?
No, no way. That would take weeks. We are placing a microscope strictly and exclusively on Chapter 2.
Right.
And that chapter is titled Examination of Motion, or Analysis of Going and Coming.
Which sounds so simple, going and coming.
It does. But Nāgārjuna takes this incredibly mundane, everyday concept, going from point A to point B, and he uses it like a crowbar.
A crowbar to do what?
To pry open our deepest, most stubborn psychological traps because, and this is crucial, he is not arguing that your commute to work doesn't, practically happen.
Okay, good, because I definitely drove here today.
Right, exactly. He's not telling you to ignore stop signs because cars don't exist.
Yeah, please don't do that.
Please don't.
Oh, yeah.
But he is attempting to expose the illusory nature of motion on an ultimate structural level.
Why, though? Why does it matter?
Because if we misunderstand how movement and change operate, we fundamentally misunderstand who and what we are.
Okay, let's unpack this, because, the gap between I think walking is real and I fundamentally misunderstand my own identity feels like the Grand Canyon.
It's a huge leap, yeah.
We need to build a bridge there. So to do that, we have to look at the opponent Nāgārjuna is arguing against. And that opponent is actually our own deeply ingrained intuition.
Yes, our everyday common sense.
Right. We look at the world, and our brain automatically categorizes it into a very specific grammar. Like, we see solid, independent things, nouns. And we see those nouns occasionally performing actions, verbs.
Right, so you're saying we separate the two completely.
I am a noun. I exist completely on my own. And when I want a glass of water, I pick up the verb walking and attach it to myself.
You put on the walking coat?
Right. I walk to the kitchen, then I put the verb down, I go back to being a stationary noun.
Yes. And Nāgārjuna targets this exact assumption of independent categorical existence.
It goes right after it.
He does. He calls it out as a total fabrication. And to dismantle it, he introduces this framework we can call the union of the three spheres.
Okay, the union of the three spheres. Let's get into this.
Yeah.
Because this is the cornerstone of Chapter 2.
It really is. So Nāgārjuna argues that whenever we conceive of motion, our mind automatically, almost violently, chops a fluid reality into three distinct inherent entities.
Okay, what's sphere 1?
Sphere 1 is the goer. So that's the subject, the actor, the entity who moves.
Like me, the noun.
Exactly. Sphere 2 is the going.
The verb.
Right. The relation, the actual active process of movement. And sphere 3 is the destination.
So the object or the result, the endpoint we are moving toward.
Yes. And our intuitive dualistic mind insists these are three completely separate realities that just, happen to interact temporarily.
We think there's a goer who is perfectly complete and self-contained, just sitting there.
Right.
Who then decides to adopt this separate thing called going, to reach a completely independent piece of geography called the destination.
Exactly.
I mean, it feels like a road trip. You've got the driver, the driving, and the destination.
That is a perfect analogy.
But here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. Because if we try to isolate those things, the logic starts to fray almost immediately.
It completely falls apart.
Yeah, like you cannot be a driver without the act of driving.
Obviously not.
If you sit in a parked car with the engine off reading a book, you aren't a driver in that moment. You are a reader.
Right. The noun driver requires the verb driving to even exist in the first place.
Exactly. And you cannot have an act of driving without a direction or a destination.
Even if that destination is just the abstract concept of like forward.
Yes. These three things mentally co-arise. They are a package deal. Take away the action, and the identity of the actor vanishes.
And taking that road trip analogy further, we hit upon the absolute core of Nāgārjuna's philosophy here.
Okay, hit me.
It's the concept of emptiness, or svabhāva in Sanskrit.
Svabhāva.
Right. Now, svabhāva translates to inherent existence or own being.
Own being. That sounds very permanent.
That's the point. It means something existing entirely on its own, from its own side, completely independent of causes, conditions, or parts.
Like a completely isolated noun.
Yes. And the thing is, we deeply crave svabhāva.
We want things to be solid.
We do. Evolutionary biology actually tells us why. Our brains evolved to survive on the savanna by identifying discrete, solid objects.
Right, like that is a tiger, that is a tree, that is a rock.
Exactly. Our visual cortex is highly specialized in edge detection.
Edge detection.
Yeah, literally finding the boundaries where one object ends and another begins. We evolved to survive by seeing the world as a collection of independent entities.
So our brains are hardwired for this.
Completely. But Nāgārjuna is pointing out that what is biologically useful is, well, philosophically false.
Wow. Okay, so our biological edge detection software basically creates a philosophical delusion.
That is exactly what it does. We project those hard edges onto concepts and actions. We assume the goer has a hard edge, separating it from the going.
We assume the goer has svabhāva.
Precisely. But Nāgārjuna's union of the three spheres proves that because the driver, the driving, and the destination only exist in relation to one another.
They are empty.
Yes, they're empty of inherent existence. They lack svabhāva. They do not possess independent reality.
They're just labels then.
Right, they are mere designations, conceptual tools imputed by the mind to navigate a universe that is actually a seamless, undivided flux.
A seamless flux.
Yeah. If you try to find a driver completely isolated from the causes and conditions of driving, you find absolutely nothing. The identity is entirely relational.
Okay, I want to make sure we're really anchoring this concept of svabhāva for the listener, because it is so central to literally everything that follows in this deep dive.
Mo, it's the foundation of the whole text.
So think about a corporation. Let's take Apple or Microsoft.
Okay, good example.
Is a corporation a noun with independent existence? I mean, we talk about it like it is.
Right, we say Apple released a new phone. Apple bought a startup.
Exactly. But if you try to find Apple inherently existing on its own, where is it?
Is it the CEO?
No, CEOs change all the time.
Is it the headquarters building?
Definitely not. They could move to a new state tomorrow and still be Apple.
Is it the employees?
No, they turn over every single day. Is it the source code? The bank accounts?
None of these individual things are the corporation.
Right. The corporation only exists as a dynamic, interdependent web of legal, social, and financial actions.
It's totally relational.
It is entirely empty of svabhāva. Yet it functions. It has conventional reality.
That is such a brilliant modern parallel. A corporation is a conceptual overlay on a web of interdependent actions.
Yeah.
And Nāgārjuna is saying that you, as the goer, are exactly the same.
Wait, I am like Apple.
In a philosophical sense, yes. You are a conceptual overlay on a web of moving parts. We intuitively accept that a corporation doesn't have a solid, unchanging soul.
But we refuse to accept that about our own physical movement.
Exactly. We fiercely protect the idea that when I walk to the kitchen, there's an absolute, unchanging I that travels through space.
Okay, which brings us to the first massive hurdle of this whole argument.
Let's hear it.
Because if these three spheres only exist as a dependent package deal, we have to look much closer at the glue holding them together.
The action itself.
We have to look at the act of going itself. Because if the verb, the motion, is an illusion, then the noun, the I doing the moving, fundamentally falls apart.
Right. It unravels the whole sweater.
And Nāgārjuna was a master of a specific type of rigorous dialectical reasoning called Madhyamaka, right?
Yes, the Madhyamaka method. It's legendary for how it dismantles arguments.
And his primary weapon to dismantle the act of going is time. He looks at time and proves that motion cannot actually be found in it.
This is such a brilliant part of the text. This is what we call the trap of the three times.
The three times being past, present, and future.
Exactly. To prove that motion is empty of inherent existence, Nāgārjuna systematically interrogates the past, the future, and the present. He sets out to find an independent entity called motion residing in any of these temporal zones.
Okay, so let's look at the past first. What does he say?
The text refers to the past as the gone.
The gone.
Right. And Nāgārjuna posits a very simple, seemingly self-evident truth. There is no active motion in what has already moved.
Well, sure. I mean, if I look at the wet footprints I just left on the pool deck,
Yeah.
the footprints are there, but the action of making them is completely over.
Exactly. The gone-over part of the path is completely devoid of the active process of movement. The energy is spent.
It's a historical record, a memory, but it doesn't contain the live spark of motion itself. I can't extract the verb from the past.
Spot on. And similarly, we look to the future, which the text calls the not yet gone.
Okay, the not yet gone. Is there inherent motion residing in the future?
Logically, no. The space on the floor 3 feet in front of you does not contain your movement because you haven't arrived there yet.
Right. The act hasn't begun.
So the future is entirely empty of your active motion.
Okay. Past is dead. Future hasn't happened. I am totally with you so far.
Good, because here comes the hard part.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to push back hard on behalf of the listener. Because my brain is screaming at me right now.
Let me guess. What about the present?
What about the present? The present going, if I am running full speed on a treadmill right now,
Okay, visualize it.
sweat is dripping off my face, my heart is pounding at 160 beats per minute. You cannot tell me there is no motion happening in the present.
It feels very real.
My smartwatch is tracking it. The treadmill belt is whining. That is present motion.
Okay. I hear you. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of metaphysics, we have to demand a highly rigorous definition of what the present actually is.
Okay, define it.
When you say you are experiencing present motion on the treadmill, you are talking about a psychological experience.
The feeling.
Right, a sensory block of time that feels like now. But Nāgārjuna's logic forces us to look at the structural reality of time itself.
That's structural reality.
Let's try to isolate a present going that is totally inherently separate from the past, the step you literally just took, and the future, the space your foot is currently descending into.
Right, so let's isolate the pure present, the absolute now.
If we isolate the absolute now, we are looking for a moment with absolutely no duration.
Like 0 seconds.
Yes, an infinitesimal, dimensionless slice of time. And if a slice of time has absolutely 0 duration, can anything physically be displaced within it?
Let me really think about that. Because if I take a high-speed photograph of a bullet in midair,
Okay, great example.
like a shutter speed of 1/1,000,000th of a second, in that photograph, the bullet isn't moving.
No, it's not.
It is a frozen, static object suspended in space. There is no blur. There is 0 motion in the frame.
Exactly. Motion inherently requires a span of time. It requires a transition from state A to state B.
You need a before and an after.
Right. By definition, motion needs room to occur. But if the present is an absolute frozen dividing line between the past and the future,
It has no width.
none. It has no duration. Therefore, there is 0 room for displacement to occur within the present moment.
Oh,
If you string together an infinite number of 0 duration photographs, you just have an infinite number of static images.
This sounds incredibly similar to Zeno's arrow paradox from ancient Greece.
Oh, it really does.
Yeah, Zeno argued that if you shoot an arrow at any given instant of time, the arrow is exactly where it is, occupying a space equal to itself.
Right, in a frozen instant.
And if it's occupying a space equal to itself in a frozen instant, it's at rest. So how does a sequence of resting arrows create a moving arrow?
It's the exact same philosophical stumbling block arrived at from an entirely different civilization.
That is so cool.
It is, and Nāgārjuna uses it to prove that present motion cannot inherently exist. What we call the present going is actually just our mind conceptually bridging the immediate past and the immediate future.
We just glue them together.
Yes, the movement is always bleeding into what was just not yet gone and what is now already gone. It never stops to reside in a container called the present.
Let me bring some modern cognitive science into this because it beautifully illustrates exactly what Nāgārjuna is pointing at.
Oh, please do.
How does the human brain actually see motion? We think our eyes operate like continuous video cameras, but they don't.
They don't.
No. Our eyes actually make rapid, jerky movements called saccades.
Saccades, right.
And during these saccades, our brain literally shuts off our visual processing to prevent everything from becoming a blurry mess.
That's incredible.
It's called saccadic masking. We are functionally blind for a massive portion of our waking day.
This raises such an important point about the biological illusion of continuity.
Right. The brain takes these separate, static snapshots, fixations, and physically stitches them together in the visual cortex.
So it's literally doing post-production on reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it actually delays our conscious perception by about 50 to 80 milliseconds, so it has time to do the editing.
Wow.
It employs phenomena like beta movement and the five phenomena to just hallucinate a smooth transition between static frames. It is literally drawing in the blur for us.
That perfectly aligns with Madhyamaka.
So when Nāgārjuna says there is no inherent motion residing in the present, neuroscience completely agrees.
It's an illusion.
The thing my smartwatch is measuring, the thing I feel on the treadmill, is not a solid, independent property of the universe happening right now. It is a post-processed mental synthesis of memory and anticipation.
That synthesis is precisely what Nāgārjuna is trying to expose. You are taking moments that, if examined with surgical precision, cannot independently hold the property of movement.
Right, because the slices are too thin.
Yes, and you are synthesizing a continuous illusion out of them. If the past has no movement because it's exhausted,
And the future has no movement because it's unborn.
and the present is just a dimensionless conceptual boundary.
Then where exactly is the independent entity of motion residing?
It doesn't reside anywhere. It's homeless. It's a relational construct.
A relational construct.
And if motion cannot be found inherently existing within the framework of time, the entire concept starts to destabilize.
Okay, I can feel the ground shifting right now. Because if time doesn't hold motion, then where do we intuitively retreat to?
We usually retreat to the object itself.
Right. We think, okay, maybe motion isn't a property of time. Maybe it's fundamentally baked into the physical entity that is doing the moving.
Exactly.
So let's look at the mover. Because Nāgārjuna doesn't just present his own ideas in a vacuum. The Mūlamadhyamakakārikā is structured as a debate, right?
Yes, it's very dialogic. He anticipates his opponent's counter-arguments at every single step.
And the opponent here raises a very fierce common sense objection.
They do. The opponent steps in and essentially says, enough with the word games about past and future. Look at reality.
Open your eyes.
Right. They say, where there is a change in physical position, there is motion. I can physically see a man walking down the road.
He's right there.
The mover is visibly changing coordinates in space. Therefore, the property of motion inherently belongs to the mover. The noun possesses the verb.
It's the ultimate appeal to empirical evidence. Like, if I watch a massive train leave a station, the train is clearly possessing the motion. It's doing the moving.
You can't logic away a diesel locomotive.
You really can't.
But, and this is key, Nāgārjuna isn't arguing against the conventional appearance of the train. He sees it too.
Okay.
He is arguing against the opponent's philosophical premise that there is an inherently existing mover who independently possesses an action called moving.
Okay, so how does he dismantle that?
To dismantle this, he introduces a devastating reductio ad absurdum. It's known as the fallacy of two motions.
The fallacy of two motions. Let's logic through this carefully because it gets a little naughty.
It does.
If the opponent says the mover inherently possesses the act of moving, what happens?
Let's break it down into its constituent parts. So you have an entity. You have defined this entity inherently as a mover.
Okay, I am picturing a guy on the street. He is a mover.
Now, for something to be defined as a mover, by definition, it must involve motion.
Obviously.
A mover cannot be a mover without motion. Let's call the motion required to justify the noun motion one.
Okay, motion one.
Motion one is baked into the identity of the subject.
So motion one is the defining characteristic. It's what makes the guy a walker instead of, like, a sitter.
Exactly right. But then the opponent makes a second claim.
What's a second claim?
They say this inherently defined mover is currently engaging in an action, the act of going.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They say the mover moves. This requires a second instance of motion, an action actually performed by the subject. Let's call that motion two.
Wait, if I am already defined as a mover, meaning my motion is already baked into my identity as motion one,
Yes.
and then I start moving, which is motion two, Am I doing it twice?
Yes.
I have the motion that defines me and the motion I am actively doing.
Exactly. And this is where Nāgārjuna springs the trap. If there are inherently two separate motions occurring, the motion that makes the mover and the motion the mover is actively doing, then logic demands there must be two separate subjects performing them.
Wow.
Because you cannot have an action without an agent. Two motions require two movers. You've literally split the subject in half.
That is absurd. I mean, I can't look at a guy walking down the street and say, there goes Walker A, who provides the identity, and Walker B, who is currently moving his legs.
It's complete madness.
That's total madness.
And that is the point of a reductio ad absurdum. You take the opponent's premise and follow it to its logical conclusion to show that it completely violates lived reality.
Since seeing two movers when only one person is walking is patently false, the initial premise has to be wrong.
Precisely. The premise is fundamentally flawed. You cannot claim that a distinct, inherently existing mover independently possesses a separate act of moving.
Let me try a linguistic analogy here just to strip away the spatial confusion for a second.
Go for it.
Think about the phrase, the dancer dances the dance.
Okay.
If a person is already inherently defined as a dancer, meaning the act of dancing is their fundamental defining characteristic, as a noun, adding a separate verb of dancing on top of it makes it entirely redundant.
It really does.
It splits the reality into two separate ontological things, the dancer entity and the dancing entity.
Yes, exactly. You cannot pry the dancer apart from the dance. If they stop dancing, they are no longer a dancer in that exact moment.
They are a stander, a sitter, a breather.
Exactly. The identity of the agent only exists dependently in the exact moment the action is actually occurring. There is no background dancer waiting in the wings when the music stops.
But the mind fights this. I can feel my own mind fighting this right now. The mind really wants to categorize.
It does, and Nāgārjuna knows the mind is squirmy.
Squirmy is a good word for it.
So he applies what is arguably the most famous tool in Madhyamaka philosophy to finally pin it down, the tetralemma.
The tetralemma, or the four-cornered logic.
Right. This is Nāgārjuna's way of sealing all the exits.
Okay, lock the doors. Let's do this.
When we try to understand the relationship between two things, in this case, the goer and the going, our mind usually defaults to two options.
Either they're the exact same thing, or they're totally different things.
Exactly. But the tetralemma forces us to examine four possibilities. Are the goer and the going identical? Are they different? Are they both? Or are they neither?
Let's interrogate each corner. Corner 1. The goer and the going are identical. They are the exact same inherent thing.
If we assert they are identical, we run into an immediate structural collapse.
Why?
Because if the agent, the goer, and the action, the going, are completely indistinguishable, then the entire concept of movement fails.
Oh, because you no longer have a subject acting upon anything.
Exactly. It becomes a static unity. The doer is the doing. The fire is the burning. The knife is the cutting.
If there is no distinction whatsoever, nothing is actually being done.
Activity requires a relationship, and a relationship requires at least some conventional distinction.
Okay, so corner 1 is a dead end. We can't say they are identical.
No.
So we run to corner 2. The goer and the going are completely inherently different. They're entirely separate entities that just happen to intersect.
This is where most of us intuitively live.
It feels the most normal.
But if we follow it through, we hit another wall of absurdity.
Let's hit the wall.
If the goer is entirely inherently separate from motion, then you could logically have a goer who isn't moving at all.
Wait, what?
You could have a guy sitting on a park bench, completely motionless, but still possessing the absolute inherent property of goerness.
Which makes no sense. You can't be a walker if you aren't walking.
And the flip side is even more bizarre.
How so?
If the action is entirely separate from the agent, you could have the inherent action of motion happening all by itself.
A verb without a noun.
Yes. You could have a disembodied walk zipping down the sidewalk with absolutely no one and nothing performing it.
Just a pair of invisible legs going to the store.
Right, which completely defies the laws of physics and our lived reality.
So they cannot be identical and they cannot be totally different. Corners 3 and 4 are both and neither.
Right. And Nāgārjuna dismisses both because it just combines the logical errors of the first two corners into one messy contradiction.
Yeah, you can't be simultaneously identical and completely separate.
And neither is dismissed as a nonsensical cop-out that doesn't actually explain the undeniable conventional experience of movement.
Okay, so what does this all mean? The tetralemma has exhausted the mind's ability to pin down an independent reality for either the mover or the motion.
It has.
We've established that time doesn't hold motion. We've established that the object itself doesn't possess motion inherently because it leads to the fallacy of two movers.
Right.
The subject and the verb are totally empty of independent existence. So if none of these things exist from their own side, what is actually happening when we drive down the highway?
It's the big question.
Is everything just a hallucination? Are we completely frozen in some kind of cosmic simulation?
No. And this is a really crucial point of clarification. Nāgārjuna is not a nihilist.
Okay, define nihilist in this context.
A nihilism is the belief that nothing exists at all, that everything is just void and completely meaningless. Nāgārjuna is aiming for the middle way.
The middle way between inherent existence and total void.
Exactly. He is saying that motion is not a linear path of inherently existing solid objects. Instead, motion is a centerless, infinite cycle of relational events.
A centerless, infinite cycle. Wow. This takes us to a profound shift in perspective for you, the listener.
It really is a paradigm shift.
If we aren't nouns moving on a linear timeline, what does a centerless cycle actually look like? Walk us through this fractal nature of karma in motion. How is my commute to work a fractal cycle?
To understand this, we have to completely abandon the straight line.
Okay, throwing away the straight line.
The text asserts a radical continuity. Every goer at destination, meaning the entity that represents the result of one movement,
Okay.
immediately and seamlessly becomes a goer at origin for the next movement.
Let's ground this.
Yeah.
I drive to the grocery store. I pull into the parking spot. I put the car in park.
Yeah.
In that exact fraction of a second, I am the goer at destination. The trip is achieved.
Yes, conventionally, you have arrived.
Conventional.
But ultimately, there is no pause button. The universe doesn't stop. The absolute exact moment you become the goer at destination of the driving trip, you instantaneously become the goer at origin for the next interdependent action.
Reaching for the door handle.
Yes.
Unbuckling the seatbelt.
Exactly.
So there is no such thing as an absolute ending.
Never. There is no absolute first beginning to this process either. You can trace the causes and conditions of your movement back infinitely.
Like the gasoline in the car.
Right, which goes back to the dinosaurs that made the oil, the sun that grew the plants, all the way back to the Big Bang.
There is no absolute middle duration that exists independently, and there is no absolute final end.
The triad of the goer, the going, and the destination is a continuous, unbroken loop.
And it's fractal, because the scale doesn't even matter.
Exactly.
Like I zoom out, my entire life is a journey from birth to death. If I zoom into the grocery store trip, it's a journey.
And you can keep zooming in.
If I zoom into the micro movements of the muscles in my arm reaching for the door handle, that's a journey.
Yes.
If I zoom in to the calcium ions flooding my muscle fibers to trigger a contraction, it's a journey. No matter how closely you look, you never find a solid resting noun.
You just find more dependent originations, more goers at origin, instantly becoming goers at destination over and over forever.
It's an infinitely receding Russian doll of cause and effect.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
But wait, what about rest?
Ah.
If there's no absolute destination, if every ending is just a new beginning, does that mean rest is a complete illusion too?
Yes.
Like if I come home from the grocery store, collapse onto my sofa, and don't move a single muscle, am I still in the cycle?
This raises a profoundly counterintuitive question, and Nāgārjuna's texts address it unflinchingly. Yes, rest is an illusion in the absolute sense.
Well, I feel like I'm resting.
The texts state a seemingly paradoxical truth. A moving thing is not stationary, but equally, an unmoving thing is not stationary.
An unmoving thing is not stationary. That sounds like a men riddle. How can an unmoving thing not be stationary?
Because rest is entirely relative. It is just another conceptual boundary we draw based on a highly limited frame of reference.
Okay, so it's a framing issue.
Totally. You consider yourself at rest on the sofa only relative to the walls of your living room. But let's zoom out.
Okay, zooming out.
You are sitting on the crust of a planet that is rotating at roughly 1,000 miles an hour at the equator.
Right.
That planet is orbiting a star at 67,000 miles an hour.
Oh boy.
That star is being dragged around the galactic center at 500,000 miles an hour.
So spatially, I am flying through the universe at terrifying speeds while just sitting there watching Netflix.
Exactly. And biologically, too, your heart is pumping gallons of blood, your cells are undergoing mitosis.
Neurons are firing.
Mitochondria are generating ATP. Rest is just a label we stick onto a specific conventional framing of macroscopic events. It has absolutely zero ultimate reality.
It's all just flux. Nothing is solid. Nothing ever actually stops.
It is entirely flux. And if we connect this to the broader landscape of Buddhist philosophy, this centerless cycle of motion directly mirrors the concept of karma.
Let's talk about karma, because I think in Western pop culture, we often reduce karma to a cosmic point system.
Oh, constantly.
Like do something bad happens to you, a mystical ledger.
Right, but fundamentally, the word karma translates to action.
Action.
It is the law of cause and effect. Every effect, every result, every destination you arrive at through your actions immediately folds into becoming the cause, the new origin for the next moment of your experience.
It's a limitless karmic fractal. This means the concept of a stable identity is totally obliterated.
Yes, it is.
The person who decided to get in the car to go to the grocery store is not the exact same person who arrived at the grocery store.
Precisely. There is no static entity enduring unchanged through the karmic chain. The actor is constantly updated by the action.
Think about the physical reality of that. During a 20-minute drive, millions of your cells have died and been replaced.
Literally millions.
Your blood chemistry has changed based on the stress of traffic. You've formed new neural pathways from the audio you were listening to.
The goer at origin has been dismantled and reassembled into a completely new goer at destination.
It's the ultimate ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of wood on a ship during a voyage, is it the same ship when it arrives?
Nāgārjuna says no. The entity is entirely dependent on the journey that just occurred.
You cannot step into the same river twice because it is not the same river and you are not the same person.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to pause here. We need to take a deep breath
Let's take a breath.
because I can feel the listener's existential dread starting to spike.
It's intense, I know.
We have relentlessly dismantled reality for the last 30-something minutes. We've proven that time cannot hold motion because the present has no duration.
Yep.
We've proven that subjects and verbs don't exist independently because it creates phantom clones of ourselves.
Two movers, right.
We've established that there is no rest, only an infinite, terrifyingly fast, fractal cycle of karmic flux, where our physical and mental identity is constantly being destroyed and reborn every millisecond.
It is a profound ontological shock.
It's dizzying. For you, the listener, this might feel incredibly abstract and, frankly, a bit destabilizing. It is a brilliant intellectual exercise, but how does knowing that you are a centerless fractal cycle of karmic flux help you prep for a stressful morning meeting?
Right, how does it pay the rent?
Exactly. How does realizing your destination doesn't exist help you pay your mortgage? We have to bring this ancient deconstruction down to earth, because if it's just a brain teaser, it's useless.
And that is the most vital step of this entire deep dive. The sources heavily emphasize that Nāgārjuna did not write the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā to win debates or to show off his logical prowess.
He wasn't just flexing.
No, not at all. This analysis is fundamentally a meditative tool. It is a psychological intervention.
A psychological intervention.
Yes. It was designed specifically to correct our mistaken apprehension of reality. Because in Buddhist thought, this mistaken apprehension, this clinging to svabhāva, is the root cause of all human suffering.
So how do we actually apply this tool? Do we just throw away our GPS devices, stop making plans, and just, I don't know, drift through life because destinations aren't real?
No. Absolutely not. And this is where people often misunderstand Madhyamaka philosophy, mistaking it for nihilism.
Right.
To apply this, we have to understand the doctrine of the two truths, the conventional truth and the ultimate truth.
Conventional and ultimate. Okay.
Nāgārjuna does not destroy conventional truth. Conventionally, we still use maps. We plan road trips. We set 5-year career goals. We set alarms for our morning meetings. We recognize that traffic lights actually matter.
So we still play the game of life.
We play the game, but we change our relationship to the game.
How so?
These conventional realities are provisional appearances. They are highly useful, functional tools for navigating human existence. We use them. But the crucial shift is this. We stop believing they have an absolute concrete reality.
We stop gripping them so tightly.
Exactly. When we deeply internalize the emptiness of the three spheres, the interdependent flux of the goer, the going, and the destination, we learn the profound art of acting without acting.
Acting without acting. Engaging in life's activities with full effectiveness, but without the psychological baggage of reification.
Reification is the core issue here.
Explain reification.
Reification means making something real that isn't inherently real. It's treating a fluid concept as a solid, permanent object. When we reify our destinations, we suffer.
This is where it gets incredibly practical for you, the listener. Let's look at how we reify things in our daily lives, starting with career goals.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Think about a massive milestone you worked toward. Maybe you spent 5 grueling years trying to get a promotion to become a director or a VP at your company.
And for those 5 years, you treated that title as a solid, glowing destination.
You reified it. You thought, once I get there, I will have arrived. The struggle will be over. I will finally be happy.
You imbued the destination with inherent existence and permanent salvation.
Exactly. But what actually happened, they went. The literal moment you achieved it. The moment you sat at that new desk with the new title on your door.
You didn't reach an ultimate end.
No. The universe didn't freeze in a state of eternal bliss. You instantaneously became a goer at origin for an entirely new, more complex set of challenges.
You inherited new stresses, new quarterly metrics, a completely new boss to please.
And if you reified that destination, if you believed it was an absolute endpoint that would confer permanent satisfaction, you likely experienced a profound, disorienting sense of emptiness or anxiety when you got there.
This is the famous post-achievement letdown. Psychologists see it all the time in Olympic athletes after they win gold, or astronauts after they return from space.
Is this all there is? The gold medal didn't fix my soul.
But if you approach that exact same career goal using Nāgārjuna's framework, your entire psychological posture changes.
How does it change?
You still engage in the process, the going fully. You strive, you work hard, you aim for the promotion. But you do it knowing deeply that the goal is just a provisional marker in a continuous loop.
You act without acting.
Yes, you are freed from the tyranny of needing the destination to validate your existence. If you get the promotion, great, you start the next loop. If you don't get it, or if the company goes bankrupt, you don't shatter into a million pieces.
Because you knew the destination was never an absolute reality in the first place.
Exactly. It takes the crushing pressure off the outcome.
And it places the focus entirely on the nature of the process itself. You realize the joy has to be in the going, because the going is the only thing that's constantly happening.
Exactly. And we can apply this to domains far outside of our careers. Think about romantic relationships.
Oh, that's a huge one.
How much suffering is caused by reifying the concept of marriage?
We culturally frame a wedding as the ultimate destination. Happily ever after. It's literally framed as the end of the story in every fairy tale.
Right. We treat it as an inherently existing static state of rest.
But if you view marriage through the union of the 3 spheres,
a wedding is just a momentary conventional marker where 2 goers at destination instantly become goers at origin for the incredibly complex daily flux of being married.
if you expect the relationship to be a static noun, you will suffer constantly when it acts like a turbulent verb.
Because people change, bodies age, circumstances shift. By understanding that the relationship is empty of svabhāva, you can embrace the flux.
You engage with your partner as an unfolding process, not a fixed object you acquired.
That reframing completely neutralizes so much friction.
It really does. But let's take it even deeper into the darkest corners of our psychology. How does this apply to holding a grudge or dealing with past trauma?
This is where Madhyamaka logic becomes profoundly healing.
Okay, lay it out.
When we hold a bitter grudge against someone, what are we actually doing mechanically? We are reifying a past event,
We are taking the gone,
which Nāgārjuna proved is completely devoid of present reality.
and we are dragging it into the present.
Furthermore, we are reifying the identity of the person who wronged us. We freeze them in time. We say they are inherently, permanently the person who did X to me.
And we reify ourselves as the permanent victim. We say, I am inherently the person who was damaged by X.
Yes, we freeze the spheres. But what did the logic of karma and motion just teach us?
The goer at origin is not the goer at destination.
The person who wronged you 10 years ago literally does not exist anymore. Their cells have died, their brain chemistry has changed, their context is different.
And the you who was wronged 10 years ago does not exist anymore either. You are a completely new river.
By holding the grudge, you are violently trying to force 2 phantoms to interact in a present moment that has absolutely no room for them. When you realize that the actor, the action, and the result are entirely empty of permanent reality, the grip of the grudge naturally loosens. There is nothing solid to hold on to.
That is the ultimate deconstruction of the fixed self. If a goer cannot exist independently of the going, then there is no permanent, static self moving through life to be damaged, or to be praised.
We are not nouns picking up verbs.
We are a fluid process of relational events. You are not a static entity who is currently undergoing the temporary experience of hearing this audio.
The hearing, the context of your room, the temperature of the air, your personal history, the English language, all of these interdependent factors are momentarily coalescing to create the experience of you right now.
You are a verb masquerading as a noun.
A verb masquerading as a noun. I love that.
And realizing this shouldn't induce dread, it should induce radical freedom. So much of our psychological exhaustion comes from the 24/7 job of trying to protect, defend, or enhance a rigid sense of I.
We build a massive, heavily fortified castle around our identity.
We defend it on social media, we defend it in arguments, we defend it in our own internal monologues.
But Nāgārjuna's brilliant logic walks us right through the front door of that castle and shows us that there is nothing inside.
The throne room is empty.
The walls are empty. And by embracing this middle way, the path that avoids the extreme of believing in permanent, solid entities and the extreme of believing in pure, nihilistic nothingness, we become adaptable.
We become open. We become free from the tyrannical hold of fixed concepts.
We realize we are part of the flux, not separate from it. We can just dance the dance without obsessing over the independent existence of the dancer.
We live in accord with the fluid, non-dual nature of reality. It is a profound piece, what the ancient texts call the stilling of all thought.
It is truly liberating once it clicks.
Okay, we have covered a staggering amount of philosophical ground today. Let me try to wrap this up and summarize the deep dive we just took into Chapter 2 of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā.
Sounds like a plan.
Nāgārjuna's union of the three spheres, the goer, the going, and the destination, shows us that subject, action, and object are not isolated things colliding in the dark. They are a single, unified, interdependent flux. They only exist because they define each other.
And by proving that none of these exist independently, using the relentless logic of time's inability to hold motion in an infinitesimal present, and the sheer absurdity of two motions splitting a single mover in half, Nāgārjuna hands us an incredibly sharp tool.
A tool to stop clinging, a tool to stop grasping at rigid identities, fixed relationships, and absolute goals that only causes suffering when they inevitably change.
My call to action for you, the listener, today is simple but challenging. As you go about your day, try to observe yourself moving.
Just watch your own mind.
Notice how automatically, how seamlessly your brain chops a continuous, fluid reality into clunky labels. Notice how it creates me, the act of walking and the concept of there.
See if you can catch your mind in the act of building those three spheres.
And when you catch it, recognize them for what they are. Highly useful conventional tools, but not absolute truths. Don't let them trap you.
And as you mull that over, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought that builds right on what we've unpacked today. We started this deep dive talking about your commute, about the odometer ticking up on your car.
We did.
But if everything is a fractal cycle, if every destination is simultaneously a new origin, and if the biological and psychological you who arrives is entirely dependent on the journey that just happened, then the person who started the trip never actually arrives.
They don't.
The goer at origin does not survive the going to become the goer at destination. They are completely rewritten by the journey itself. So tomorrow, when you park your car, open the door and step out. Ask yourself, who exactly is getting out of the car?